We have some breaking news to report. A historic moment is about to play out. We were looking at some live pictures in New York City. We had pictures of the former president of the U.S., Donald Trump. He was making his way through a motorcade to the courthouse to be arraigned at 2:15, to be brought up on charges, which we're going to find out in a little bit. But from what we understand, that he has made his way inside the courthouse. That, once again, his arraignment is expected to be in court before a judge at 2:15. There are several charges that we're learning about pertaining to document fraud, other that are right now, for the most part, under seal. So we're going to find out a little bit more about that coming. Here's some live pictures. Once again, you've got lots of crowds that have gathered, reporters, other media, obviously a lot of supporters and a lot of opponents of the former president. And we're going to have coverage of this all throughout the afternoon. It is going to be quite the afternoon. We brought in some help to help us kind of navigate through what we're expecting today. I want to bring in lawyer Chris Burkett. Thank you so much for joining us, Chris. This is obviously, a historic moment. We're seeing a lot of this. This is something that none of us have ever seen, a former president being brought up on charges. I want to ask you a little bit about the reason why the indictment has been under seal. Why would that be the case? Why wouldn't we know of that ahead of time?
Well, today's the day that we would find out. So the normal process, the grand jury, everything that's done with the grand jury is behind closed doors, including what was presented in the evidence. That's all done behind closed doors. And then once there's been an indictment, so 23 members of the public were grand jurors, 12 had to agree that there would be an indictment. And then that moves forward to an accused being formally arraigned, which is what's happening today in New York. And so it'll be at this moment in the usual process that the unsealing of the indictment will be made public. And apparently the latest is that it's 34 counts and all felony counts.
From what I understand, that when it comes to campaign financing and some of the charges that we've heard of in the past, that didn't necessarily elevate to a felony. Why is some of that being considered a felony in this particular situation?
And there's been a lot of commentary about whether, of all the investigations happening involving the former president, was this the right case to take forward? Because you're right, the underlying allegations are considered misdemeanors under New York law. It's the combination of a payment that was made and put under a legal retainer, even though it was a hush payment, then not properly being accounted for as a campaign finance spending. So it's the combination of those two acts that, at least in the theory of Alvin Bragg, the DA prosecutor, the DA in Manhattan, that's the theory that those two events potentially combined to create a felony.
And there's a lot of questions of whether or not this was worth it, that even Bragg's predecessor declined to seek an indictment on this particular matter. And, you've heard from the former president saying that this has been a witch hunt by a Democratic prosecutor who's out for blood. And then you look at you mentioned there's been several other situations in the past. When you look back to 2017, 2018, the alleged collusion with Russia. There was the obstruction of, in the investigation into the alleged collusion when it came to Ukraine's president about that infamous phone call. That led to his first impeachment. That didn't work. He was acquitted there. I mean, there's been several other
there certainly have
several other situations.
Of,
so the big question is whether this is worth it. If the case against him is solid.
No, I think time will tell on that. There's certainly been criticism, and I think anything involving Donald Trump, half the U.S. population is outraged, and half the population thinks it's about time. So I think this is a case where we're going to now hear, once the indictment's unsealed, exactly what evidence and exactly on what charges are going to be before the court. And again, this is all political in so many ways, right? So you have a former president, you have a Democratic prosecutor, as you said. So for certain, the political ramifications are significant and important. That said, this is going to go through the judicial process. And again, time will tell whether this was a wise move by the prosecutor and made sense in the law or not.
Well, some of the critics I hear, they say, even if Bragg doesn't win the case, that he still wins politically. in some respects.
There's definitely some who've suggested this is a prosecutor that's in an elected position. He ran in part on a campaign that he would be tough on these issues, and so certainly that's a criticism that he's open to. Again, we got to watch this process play out. I don't think we should prejudge just at this stage, but I think it's certainly a problem when you think about the political dynamic in the country right now, that a political prosecution of a former president who's also running for president could only elevate his standing. Clearly, he's raising money on the back of this. So there's far further ramifications than just what's happening in New York right now.
I want to talk about the potential of maybe pleading guilty to a lesser charge, or some sort of a plea.
Yeah.
You look at the history of Donald Trump. You look at the history of the Trump Organization, who has been sued who knows how many times.
Yeah, countless.
There's generally a plea that's involved. He tries to basically put this to bed, sweep it under the rug, and move on. But that's something that he says he's being defiant about. I have to wonder whether or not, I mean, even though the lawyers are saying that in public, behind closed doors, if they're trying to maybe convince him this might be the cleaner way to end this situation.
Sure. I mean, I think his lawyers are considering all options. You've seen from his one lawyer, Joe Tacopina, apparently he's got a new lawyer who's joining the case, Blanche. I think they're going to fight hard. I think they're also going to take the temperature of the nation and the Trump supporters. Is the fact that he's being prosecuted elevating him? Is this going to be used as a political opportunity for him? All of that's going to come into play. So I don't expect any sort of early resolution to this, but it's not out of the question. When
we were talking about the hush money payments and the in-kind contribution to his political campaign, one of the things that Trump said, that one of the reasons why he did settle with this adult film star was just essentially to spare his family from embarrassment and not necessarily to win the 2016 election.
Right, and I think that's going to be tested in court on this case. Was it simply to avoid his wife finding out and the public embarrassment? Now, the problem is it all happens around the same time as he's running for president, and you have a cooperating witness in Michael Cohen, his ex-lawyer, who's going to say, I expect, that this was very much directed as a political calculation, and he needed to cover this up in order to save himself in his run for the presidency. So, again, Mr. Cohen is a witness who, many will question his credibility, given he's been convicted himself of crimes. But I certainly think the prosecutor will have evidence and witnesses that would suggest this was very clearly a political decision.
You also have to wonder, after 230 years of American norms, of how this is going to change the political landscape, but also how in the future, how maybe Republicans might want to use this precedent moving forward. It's no secret that there have been a lot of Trump's, whether you call them enemies, political, people from the other side of the political spectrum have been after him. They've wanted to see this day, and it didn't really matter what the charges were. They want to see this man indicted. On how this is really going to change the landscape and how the tables could potentially turn down the road if this goes the other way.
Yeah, I think you always need to be thinking about blowback, and so the Democrats for sure should be thinking that you have a Republican Party now that's going to very clearly and has said, well, we now may decide to bring prosecutions against those leaving office or those in office as a retaliation against this. And so you create, as you said, a sort of a norm-breaking moment here where we weaponize the judicial system and the legal system in order to settle political scores. And whether that's what this is or not, certainly there will be some that see it that way, and it opens up a whole new set of issues in an already very fractious political climate.
President Biden has his own Justice Department, and from what we understand, that when it came to prosecuting this case, he declined to do so, and presumably because there might not have been enough meat in this case to move forward with this. What do you think that says about this situation? And now you've got this Democratic district attorney in New York who's moving forward with this.
Well, again, I think we'll see exactly what Alvin Bragg's bringing forward today, and I think a lot of the answers to the questions you're raising is there something there? Is there meat on the bone?
Smoking gun.
Is there a smoking gun? Is there some evidence that we haven't heard about, that we don't know about, that may make it all come clear? But I think it's a fair point about previous prosecutors and others that have looked at these issues and not pursued them. The Justice Department in the U.S., it's an independent arm of government that will have made their own decisions, but they also take into account these kinds of factors and whether or not charging an ex-president, it's such a historic precedent-setting moment, you better have a pretty serious case that can hold up in court.
So much of the discussion around the politics of this situation playing out, and at a time when, Mr. Trump is still running to be president.
Yeah.
And he for a lot of people who have counted him out in the past, they learned the hard way. And this is something that no doubt is probably going to galvanize, however many of his supporters are still there that are going to be to support him throughout his run for the White House. You have to wonder how this is going to energize this base, which is a very strong base in the United States still.
Sure. I mean, we don't have to look much beyond January 6th and the ability of Donald Trump to create outrage and action amongst his supporters. So that's certainly on the minds of all observers right now. And I think that political aspect of this and the fact that this is a former president running for president at a moment in time where the base of his support is incredibly energized and has shown itself willing to take extraordinary steps. It is we're at a particularly pivotal and dangerous moment in the political history of the United States.
I was just looking on social media, on Twitter earlier, and there was some interviews on CNN with one of Trump's attorneys, and they were making accusations that Mr. Bragg had leaked some of the number of charges, indictments to the media. Is that a felony, as they're saying?
I saw some of those headlines, that the fact that we now have at least heard through news reports that there's 34 counts and they're all felonies, and that may have come from Mr. Bragg's office. Certainly, if there's a leak from a DA's office, that's of concern. I wouldn't know, based on the information we've got yet, what sort of offense that might add up to. But again, there's going to be a lot of mud being slung back and forth between Trump's team and the DA. And
you have to assume that as defiant as he is, he's going to maintain that this is a political witch hunt. I believe we do have some footage of Donald Trump, who was leaving his motorcade. We're going to pull this up right now. You can see him right there. He's waving to some of his supporters. Not surprising in the red tie that I was taking a guess on, but on one hand, Chris, this is a man who thrives in being in the spotlight. He loves the attention, but you also have to wonder. I mean, this is a man who doesn't like to lose, and you have to wonder what's going on through his head right now at a time when he's still trying to win back the White House.
Yeah, I think in many ways, as we've seen with them attempting to raise money through their supporters, that there's two sides to how he's responding here. Here's his legal team and his political team, and what we're seeing unfold on TV. I mean, in my lifetime, the closest I can think of watching that motorcade was the O.J. Simpson Ford Bronco. This is sort of one of those moments that will stay, and people are standing watching their televisions. I think for Trump, in his mind, he always believes he's going to find a way to get out from under these kinds of things, and his experience in business and in politics has shown generally he does find ways to potentially avoid accountability. I do think some part of him must believe that maybe that luck is finally running out, and then there's another part of him and political advisors saying we got to maximize this moment. The fact that the nation is fixated on this, and even people who he's going to be up against, like Governor Ron DeSantis, is coming out to call into question this as a political persecution. So even those who are opposed to him in the potential Republican primaries are having to fall into line to call this a political prosecution.
We watched from here in Canada what played out between 2016 to 2020. I don't think it's wrong to say that it was probably the most divisive the country has ever been. That in many ways the country was, fractured, and here comes Joe Biden, and while there's still a lot of political division in this country, the climate kind of came down a little bit. The temperature was lowered.
Sure.
And I'm curious from your perspective. I mean, we don't know how this is going to play out. This is still early stages, but you have to wonder what's this going to do to the temperature of this country that has been dealing with so much division more than we've seen in probably a couple hundred years.
Yeah. No, I think that's going to be the question on everybody's mind is this somehow going to ratchet back up to the height of the division and the fractiousness in the American Republic? Or are people who may have been Trump supporters going to finally say, we've seen enough and turn their attention to someone else? I think we're at a very delicate moment where this either leads to Trump's popularity rising and him becoming the clear frontrunner and next Republican candidate for president and all of the drama that will follow that, or will people begin, the independents, those on the who are not on the extreme side of the Republican Party, turn their attention elsewhere?
And same for the Republican Party. I mean, it seems as though that they've been almost kind of trying to distance themselves from the former president as they move towards trying to picking the new nominee to represent the Republican Party. But you also have to wonder what kind of conversations are going on right now with Mitch McConnell and other Republicans on whether or not this is they're hunting down one of their own, and how is that? What's stopping the Democrats from trying to do that again with another Republican as well?
Yeah, I think for the Republicans, they've had their many moments to decide to distance themselves in a meaningful way, and I think because the Trump base is so important to the Republican Party now, they'll often find it hard to fully pull away, and so this is another test of that dynamic.
And very quickly before we go to break, I mean, we understand that Trump is expected to speak later today. I can imagine as a lawyer, you probably would want your client to stay pretty quiet at a time right about now.
Generally, the rule is in these kinds of situations, you say nothing, you let your lawyer talk, and you let the process play out in the courts, but that's not Donald Trump's style.
Absolutely. International lawyer Chris Burkett, we appreciate your time. We're going to be chatting all afternoon, and thanks for being here. Thanks.